Welcome to my desk at Birkenshaw. I'm going to give a talk on the origins of the village of Birkenshaw, both the origins of the name, although that's fairly well established, and the origins of the establishment of the place. It's going to involve some modern technology. I've got a PowerPoint, Microsoft Movie Maker, courtesy of Microsoft, and also an application I've written myself to display my image whilst I'm speaking. So let's get on with the talk. Birkenshaw. Now Birkenshaw is now in the centre of West Yorkshire. That's Birkenshaw, and this is an outline of West Yorkshire. This is the modern West Yorkshire when the boundaries were rationalised. There used to be more of West Yorkshire extending to the north into North Yorkshire and the south into what is now South Yorkshire. But that is modern day West Yorkshire. And the village of Birkenshaw is roughly right in the centre of it. It's perhaps a new place. We'll see why that is later. But I don't think it's too new. It's next door to Gomersall, which is from Guthma or Guma, body of men, or the man Guthma, his farmstead. That's not far away. That's Birkenshaw today. It's this area here, right in the middle. This built-up area, straddled by Bradford Road, Whitehall Road, and to the north the A650, sometimes termed Wakefield Road. Birkenshaw also involves East Byley here. We can see that it's a built-up area surrounded to the east and west by farmland, arable land, I would say, relatively farmland. That's to the west, that's the Lodgebeck area, running from East Byley down into Hunsworth. That's a beck, that where those shrubs are, that's a beck area. And this is in the middle, very near where I was born. This is Tong Moor, probably named because it belonged to the lord of the manor in Tong nearby. And this is rather coarse, rough land, not particularly arable. There's gorse further on in this moor. And then to the east we have the Kittlesbeck area, again nice arable-like land. This picture was taken from the Birkenshaw Bottoms area. Now here's an interesting diagram. This is a contour map, or superimposed on that aforementioned map of Birkenshaw. There you see the streets of Birkenshaw. This is the scale, elevation in metres. So the magenta, the purple, is 223 metres. So have a look at Birkenshaw. It's on a slope. The majority of the modern village is on a slope. Steep land to low land in Birstall. This is Byley up here, Birstall down here, Birkenshaw in the middle. And the whole of the built-up area is on a slope, including that Tong Moor area. So it's not very good, really. It's not very good land. It's on the windward side of a hill. The prevalent wind in England is from the southwest, so it's a windy area. You wouldn't want to settle here on the whole. This perhaps explains why Gummersall to the south, on this promontory on the sides of these hills, which are at a more favourable inclination, was probably settled first. And also on both sides of Birkenshaw you have settlements. You have settlements here in Driglington, Ardwalton, Tongue, and to the west you have Oakenshaw in this valley. These are more favourable areas. These were mentioned earlier in the Domesday Book, but not this corridor of land here. There was no mention of Bailey, Birkenshaw or Birstall in the Domesday Book. So it's not a good place to settle on the whole. Too exposed. But I don't think it's that new. Or at least the area around it is certainly not that new. We'll look at a map first of all. These are Roman roads. The black lines designate Roman roads. We have a line running roughly along Wakefield Road, the A650, going through Bradford and to the fort at Elsack near Skipton. And we have this Roman road, which is a very well established Roman road, going to Manchester from Castleford, I think it is. This Roman road on the A650 is less established, but this one is very well established. And there are many Roman sites in the area. There's been coins found. There's evidence of a Roman villa in Birstall. There's been coin found in Cleckheaton. There's been coins found in Gildersome. Here, this is Gildersome. There's been coin found there. And there are Saxon features as well. There are Saxon features in the church at Birstall, which is just here. There's the so-called Walton Cross here. Walton means town of the Walsh, the Welsh, the Britons. It's the Old English name for the Britons town. Walton Cross on high ground here. So there's a lot of old features in the immediate area, but complete absence of them in Birkenshaw. So this is to emphasise what I've said. We have the Roman roads, the Roman coins. Now the indigenous people in this country, what you might think of indigenous, is the Celtish, the British people that lived before the Anglo-Saxons arrived from northern Germany. Americans might like to think of these as the indigenous people of Great Britain, although it's a moot point because they perhaps came many thousands of years ago from across Europe, from the Ukrainian steppes ultimately. So when one is talking about indigenous, you've got to be very careful because there's never really an indigenous person unless you talk about the first person, which perhaps comes from Africa. I don't know. It's not the scope of this talk. Birstall, for example, haven't mentioned this. This may have had a British name, Brynel. Bryn and L, two Welsh words meaning top of a hill and place. So So we've got all the elements of many languages in there. We've got the Hull of the Anglo-Saxon farmstead, etc. As I've mentioned, Oddwalton and Driglington. These have British origins. The Driglington name has British origins. I think it means town of 3 Britons. And it's thought to be a Roman villa at Birstall, as mentioned. Now the name, there's not too much disagreement about that. It's probably from Old English and Old Norse words meaning birch, birka, or birken, plus the Old English word skaga, that's where you get the shore from, that means copse. There's an outside chance it might be from the words meaning Britain, that is the indigenous inhabitants, and wood, although it doesn't look or sound too like that, so that's probably not the case. This is the well-established, the upper one is the well-established derivation, and that's probably what it comes from. Now there's a lot of Nordic influence in this area. You see it in the word for Birken. Den means wooded valley in German. Syke, that's a common surname in the area. There's also, for example, one of the lords of the manor of Driglington was a Syke, a self-made lord of a manor, I think he was, but he was a Syke. It's a prominent name in the area. And it also means ditch, I do believe, in a Nordic language. Gildesum has Norse origins. Gildi Husum, the house of trades, the house of money, the house of work. Now the Danish invasion, there was a Danish invasion around that time, AD 867. And there's quite a bit of Danish influence in West Yorkshire, and the evidence from the inscriptions at the Walton Stone, the Walton Stone, and the artifacts in the Birstall Church show that Birkenshaw may well have been settled, first of all, late 1st century when the Danes were arriving. So it's perhaps a mixture of Anglo-Saxon people, Angles, and Nordic people, Danes. That fits. It's not a favoured area to settle. It's too barren. The Anglo-Saxon, they wouldn't have picked that area. It would have been left, and perhaps for the Danes to inhabit. Now the Anglo-Saxons were converted to Christianity around that time, and if you look on the map of Birkenshaw, you go to East Barley up there, there is actually what was the Bradford historian Cudworth described as a preaching cross. Now there's a line of sight, you can see it today between that area and that area, the Walton Cross. So two preaching crosses, 2 Christian crosses, Christian influence, both with Nordic influence. So there's quite a bit of influence of Scandinavian influence in Birkenshaw, because it was late to be settled, we suspect, since it's a barren area. These words that I've mentioned, Birken, they also apply to these three places I mentioned previously: Biley to the northwest and Birstall to the southeast. You see the eye of the Birken in both of those. The other terms are the ley, the Anglo-Saxon, meaning clearing, shaw meaning copse, and hall meaning farmstead, settlement. So we have what actually is a birch corridor here. Places named after birch, inhospitable areas. Birch grows in inhospitable areas. It's a frontier species. It grows where other species can't get a grip initially. It's a frontier species. So this is Birkenshaw's birch corridor, and Birkenshaw is right in the middle of it. Now, where was this talk is all about the origins of Birkenshaw. Where was the ancient settlement? Well, I suspect it's in two areas. We've got two areas of good arable land, here and here. So there's the Lodgebeck here and the Kittlesbeck here. And Birkenshaw Bottoms, which is just here, there's evidence of that being inhabited earlier than the majority of Birkenshaw. And we've got the evidence of the preaching cross in East Barley. So perhaps these outlying regions, consistent with the goodness of the land, were settled first on either side, Birkenshaw Bottoms and East Barley. That's putative, that's just a theory. There's quite a few Birkenshaws after the coining of the name by the Anglo-Saxons or the Nordic people, mentioned in the Wakefield Manor court rolls. There's many Birkenshaws mentioned, as though they take the name from a settlement which existed at the time. But that's quite puzzling, because Anglo-Saxon is 1st century, going on from 500-600 onwards, and these are much later. And what's also puzzling is that these men were recorded in court rolls and sessions of the court in areas not in Birkenshaw but in other areas of the Manor of Wakefield, in Alverthorpe and Sowerby Bridge. So it seems that there used to be a Birkenshaw, but, well, if there was a Birkenshaw, perhaps it was just a birch copse and people knew it as a birch copse and nobody actually lived there. But if somebody did live there, then they seem to have been dispersed between the period of, say, 1050 and these times. So what happened to them? Why did the place disappear, if indeed it ever was something more than just a birch copse? Perhaps these people take their names from a birch copse, and there's lots of birch. Birch is a common tree, particularly in these areas. Perhaps these are all people just named after a birch copse because they live near a birch copse. That's how names got going often. But it seems a bit coincidental to me, because there's lots of Birkenshaws now and a similar type of names to Birkenshaw. if you research on ancestry.co.uk, you'll see lots of Birkenshaws, and these are from 1500 onwards. So it seemed there was a Birkenshaw. There were several Birkenshaws about, but they dispersed, and they weren't present in where Birkenshaw is any longer in the village. There was no substance to the place. There were no buildings in the village. So what happened to them? It seemed to have been founded around 850 to 1050. If it was founded, if it wasn't just a birch corpse which people took the name from, as they did elsewhere, but if it was founded around then, what happened to them? Well, there's various historical events that may explain that. There's William the Conqueror's harrying of the north, his vengeful retribution due to an uprising by northern peoples against his rule. He slaughtered and burnt Copts, and that set the area back for hundreds of years, really, perhaps. There were frequent raids by the Scots, particularly after their defeat of the English at the Battle of Bannockburn. The Black Death didn't help, killed half the population, so any struggling population's not going to fare very well there. There was constant wars. There was the Wars of the Roses. There was the Civil War. That very confused war. I don't know what that war was all about, to tell the truth. Roughly between parliamentarians and those that supported a more king-like rule. There was a battle at Odwalton. So I've got up to about the 1700s, and this is an early map. There it is, Birkenshaw. We can see Birkenshaw. We can see Birstall, East Byley, and Byley. And there's Birkenshaw there. There's Dreelinton, there's Odwalton. Birkenshaw is just a few houses around Birkenshaw Bottoms. That is in 1771, just before Birkenshaw took off. That track that I showed on that map is adjacent to the watercourses. So, as I suggested, we have habitable areas in East Byley and adjacent to the watercourses of near Birkenshaw Bottoms. The Tetleys of the Tetley Brewing Company, they come from Birkenshaw. They can be found in early land tax returns and the hearth tax of 1679. Perhaps they grew barley on the east side where the Kittlesbeck is. There's a Birkenshaw gravestone from 1849, which is in the graveyard of St Paul's Church in Birkenshaw. Note numerous spellings of the name, very different variations of the spelling. There's other Birkenshaws in England and Scotland. What can they tell us about the origins of the Birkenshaw in West Yorkshire? Well, there's a Gaelic word, baita, meaning birch. And there was a Birkenshaw in Lancashire, near Bolton, north of Bolton. There's a Birkenshaw Hall there. There we see Bolton. There's Birkenshaw. It's on a similar windward side of a slope. So how do you get the T there? That's perhaps a dialect coming in. The sound of the N and the I in the regional dialect changes the K to the T. Easy to say in the regional dialect. It's suspected that all these other Birkenshaws are that are down the west side of the UK are perhaps from the Strathclyde Britons, speaking Gaelic, the Gaelic Britons. So Nordic peoples generally came, the Anglo-Saxon people and the Danes generally came from the east, from the Humber and the rivers there. The Viking people, they tended to come from the west, so they colonized Birkenshaw later because they came in from the river. What's it called? The river in Liverpool. The river Liverpool that and these tributaries here. They would have colonised the east, crossing the Pennines later. So it's not very probable that Birkenshaw is from the Gaelic bite. It's not as probable, I don't think, but it's an outside chance. I don't think it's. I think it generally is Anglo-Saxon. So we've got one in South Lanarkshire. This is. I'm not too familiar with these areas. That's Glasgow up there, Motherwell, I think, and this is Birkenshaw, South Lanarkshire. You can't really deduce anything from this. South, and there's one in North Lanarkshire, much nearer to Glasgow, the Clyde there. You can't really deduce anything other than the fact that it's a name after a birch copse. I think that's all you can deduce there. There's one in Lothian as well. This just seems to be an urban area name. I don't think you can deduce anything too much from that, but I thought I'd mention them because there are other Birkenshaws or areas called Birkenshaw about, and it probably comes from the birch tree, Proscaga Shaw. Right. Who owned the land in the time of that Jeffreys map? Well, it was probably the lords of the manor, the various lords of the manor around the place, Bowling, Tongue and Oakwell, and other gentry. John Ellison. Now we come to the seminal moment in the village development when John Emmett bought and rented land from John Ellison to found an iron furnace for making pig iron. That's a crude form of iron. That is opposite to what is now Threelands. Threelands is where John Emmett had his house, and it was so called because this minor man of the gentry had 3 plots of lands in the area. One at Threelands, one at Hilltop, now known as Hilltop House, and I don't know where his other one was. It might have been this plot of land that he sold to John Emmett, who came from Halifax. These Emmets acquired much of land in Birkenshaw, in fact the majority of the land. the centre of the village. They owned the land on which St. Paul's Church was built. They donated the church land to build the church. And that's really when Birkenshaw, it's really when the place came of age, when it was founded. All the central area was built up, Town Street. From then onwards, the roads were improved. They were turnpiked. That's Furnace Lane. Down there, he had his foundry on the west side of Bradford Road. That's an old house. I suspect that was one of the first houses to be built to service this foundry. You can see it's a bit of a odd angle. They weren't too careful about precise geometry in those days when they were knocking up places. Just placed it where there was a bit of land and it was convenient for doing something nearby. This is a photo I got of what's called Navigation Bank. It's believed, although there's some considerable debate in that the slurry from the ironworks, the iron slurry, was taken away along a canal here to Drub. Drub is a word that means waste, disused coal. So it's a dialect word, and that from the site in Birkenshaw, just south of East Barley, took it away. I think the coal was probably brought from East Barley, because East Barley was a coal mining area, or Bolling further north, not too long way. So the heavy coal was brought downhill and the waste was removed also downhill. That would seem sensible. I have come across some reports that thinks that the coal was dug up around Hundsworth and brought up here. How they move it uphill, I'm not too sure. I doubt that occurred. So we have a few modern photographs now to sort of end the talk. This is the current High Street, looking along Bradford Road. As you move along there, you come across Foundry Lane, just pictured on the left. That's the first school, founded as I think it was as a church school. The Reverend John Smith had a lot to do with that. It was up and running before education became compulsory. Private school probably. And in 1870, I think there were various acts of Parliament making education more mandatory. Now, it's either gifted to this is the cemetery. It's either gifted to the church by William Ackroyd. He was an industrialist. He had a mill around Birkenshaw Bottoms, or it was gifted along with the land by John Emmett. I'm not too sure about the truth of that particular statement. That's what the church side said, but I've read other accounts that suggest the whole of the land was given by John Emmett. He owned most of it. This is the halfway house, intersection of the leads to Halifax and the Bradford to Dewsbury Road. It's been there since about 1850s, I think. Now here's a Haddon account. Have a read of that. I'm 11 and a half years old. I don't like being at pits or wheel. It's too hard work for us. My sister hurries with me. Hurrying is the dragging of the coal carts on your hands and knees, perhaps naked, because it's hot. So she's describing her working conditions and what she had to do from the age of who knows what. Ibbetsons, that's a common local name. I knew people of that name when I was at school. They were pit owners. And true to form, they had their own children working in the pit by the looks of it. This is where the coal for the Birkenshaw ironworks might have come from. Bowling, a lot of pits, a lot of open cast mining, a lot of mining done around here, and also in East Piley. Interestingly enough, the Birkenshaw Ironworks was the first ironworks. It was established in 1782, and it provided it made the blast furnace for the Low Moor Ironworks, which subsequently put it out of business. I don't quite know why it put out of business. Perhaps it wasn't near enough to all this coal, and the Low Moor Ironworks was, so perhaps they had economies of scale at Lower Moor because it was a bigger place. But anyway, that's supplying your competitor to your demise. James Oddie was a. We're going now into the industrial era of Birkenshaw and the consequences of that. We've got a row of houses built by James Oddie for the works in his mill. His mill was on the left here along Bradford Road. That was a residence of the Oddies, Lapwater Hall, now an Indian restaurant. This air raid shelter, Bradford, wasn't untouched by the Second World War because it was an industrial place. People had a reason to bomb it. These are miners' cottages. A lot of the people in East Piley would have been miners. That's the sign of the times, isn't it? Church converted into flats. That's in East Piley. Tetley, commemoration of the Tetleys. Yes, they were here from 723 onwards. George Tetley. And there we have evidence of the Tetleys in a gravestone that is now in the graveyard of St Paul's Church, previously mentioned. A Tetley. So that brings me to the end of this short talk. You can obtain more detail and better expressed in this booklet that is available from that website. Mathematical Services being my trademark. So thank you for listening and watching.